Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I will be joined soon by my very dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being students on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that even mean? So what is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? All the beauty and crazy, all the joys and the messes, all the bliss and the grit that is a human life. We'll be attempting to sort that out for ourselves as we chat here on the show. Okay, so for the first time ever, we said we were going to record a part 2 to an episode, and then we actually did. So this is, for real, a follow-up to last week's conversation on self-love. Today, we're talking about what self-love looks like in action. And we started to dip our toes into that in last week's episode, and we realized that we had, so much more to say than we could fit in the last 5-10 minutes of that show. So ultimately, what we're chatting about is that self-love is about living from what is true for you and finding a way out of all the conditioning that tells you really interesting things, like that what's true for you is dangerous, or what's true for you is not to be trusted, or that what's true for you is simply not true. And what we get into is pondering if every action in our lives, large and small, even the teeny tiny stuff, ultimately gets born from either truth, aka clarity, or fear. And what does that mean in how we navigate it in the moment by moment present tense as it arises? If you're enjoying the show, well, we would be totally delighted if you left a review on iTunes. It helps us to know how we're doing, and it also helps other people to find the show and grow what we hope will be a really lovely and nourishing community over time. One last note before we head into the conversation. Vanessa and I do have potty mouths, so as usual, if there are kids around, you might want to pop in some headphones. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so Brooke, this might be possibly the first time that we said we were going to record an episode, and then we immediately did. So, part 2 of last week's self-love conversation. We can kind of call it self-love in action. And I wanted to start this week with reading a quote. I don't know how we got into this habit, but I just love this quote. So here's the quote, and this comes from Kieran, aka Mystic Girl in the City. And the quote is, "Alignment is authenticity in action, saying and standing in what's true for you, being what you are, being and speaking and embodying all that you are. There are no shoulds or ought tos in alignment. There is only a feeling of truth, an internal gauge of what's true and only true for you that has the sweetest essence of right action, even though you have no idea why. That is alignment. And it's very, very available." And I know she's using alignment and she's using authenticity, and you didn't hear the word self-love, but last week in our episode on self-love, we kind of ended the conversation reflecting on what Reggie says about how self-love really is an act of being true to yourself, making space for your genuineness and your suchness to exist. So I thought this could be an interesting quote to kick us off on the idea of self-love in action.
Yes, it is. And gratitude to Kieran, not just for that quote, but, she's somebody that you and I are both doing, mentoring work with. And she's really gotten me on this, and it's really opening up my life in pretty beautiful ways. So in our conversation on self-love, the place that ride took us was that self-love is living from what's true for you, living from clarity. And I think that those are things that we can think about and talk about on these kind of gross levels, what's true for me is to do work that's meaningful, right? It's like, great, that is true for me. But what we're talking about are actually those really, really, really scarier present tense, moment by moment levels of what's true. We're talking about both, but the parts that I feel like get missed or confused about this are honestly just how challenging it is. to live from that place.
To live from the place of what's true for you.
Yeah. And I mean, so first of all, what's true for you, it's confusing. Like we have so much conditioning about who we are. Like we've built up this identity through a lifetime. We've had identity imprinted on us by everyone, our parents, our schoolmates, our teachers, our whatever, and ourselves. And so we have ideas, we have lots of shoulds or things that fit, things that seem to make sense with what we've come to identify with. And so it's actually, the first part of this is that it's very difficult initially to start to distinguish true and versus conditioning or should. Would you agree that that's like the initial challenge?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could, in my mind, the way I'm thinking is like we could lay it out in kind of this big umbrella. So our overarching statement is that it's actually an act of self-love to make space for your truth, right? Just to be, just to exist without labels and shoulds and conditions and judgments and criticisms, just to kind of follow the essence wherever it leads and just embrace your suchness, like we were talking about, or like the Taoists would call like your self-so. It's like this spontaneous nature that Taoists always said you want her to return to. So the big umbrella is self-love means to follow your authentic impulse. And then underneath it, the challenge section is how do we even recognize what is genuine for us? Like in a world where we have preferences and conditioning and habits and fears, how does one make sense out of what's a genuine impulse versus what's a habit or a belief or a fear-based movement, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah. And thank God for your organized mind. Because you put it into better terms than I was capable of at the moment.
No, your terms were spot on. This is just like to sort my brain out. Okay, so if you all can accept the idea that there's something very loving about making space for authenticity, like Brooke and I can, we can begin the dialogue of how does one be authentic with themselves? And I guess just to circle back, back up for a second. And my brain comes to this thing. I don't know why. Years ago, I read this quote by John Wellwood, and he was talking about how, let's say, if a kid falls, right, and they cry and they come running to the parent, they don't want you to tell them about how to walk more properly, and they don't want to lecture, and they don't want reason or rationality. They just want space to have a feeling and to be held, and like just to be hugged and soothed and comforted. But it really comes from giving someone the space just to have their experience, and kind of holding in this really present way while someone has this experience. And I guess that's for me, like kind of the foundational part of self-love is, can we be that holding presence? Can we stay with ourselves and just make space for ourselves to have an experience, trusting that something genuine is moving through us? So I guess as I'm starting to think about this in dialogue with you, there's this piece of, for us to even begin to look at what's authentic for me, we have to also look at, can we trust ourselves? Can we trust our feelings? Can we trust our movements? Can we trust our inner desires? And if we can even begin to trust, then how do we get this intuitive sense of what voices and needs and desires to follow?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And so the question is, how do we have a different experience of ourselves than our ideas about ourselves and other people's ideas about who we are? And so for me, the kind of, step one of coming home to yourself is why you and I are so passionate about embodiment work, because the body is the truth teller. The body is the thing that knows not just you, your identity, you, but also there's this deeper, bigger ground of something, whatever you want to call it, that's just nourished and nourishing and home and yes and good and clear and all of those things. So for me, and this isn't like a do this check box, this is a constant lifetime's worth, I think, of unfolding and feeling into and getting to know inhabiting myself physically, doing this, via somatic meditation in a variety of ways that you and I do that. So primarily for those who are new to listening, through the lineage of Dharma Ocean and those somatic meditation approaches, through Judith Blackstone's realization process work, through our work with Kieran. But it's all like, how do you feel into yourself in a way that goes beyond ideas of who you are? And just that process of step by step, layer by layer, year by year, forever, getting more deeply into yourself is the beginning of being able to feel, because most of us only feel our ideas about who we are and what the world is. So that's the beginning of being able to have contact with something different than our ideas about what the world is and our ideas about who and what we are. And that's the place where we start to be able to hear the voice of truth for me as an individual bit of fundamental consciousness, is from that place. And that's a moment by moment thing. But if I don't have the opportunity to have that experience, then I don't really get a chance to know anything other than ideas. And sometimes I can decide ideas are true, or have a very passionate feeling about, yeah, I want, that thing, that job, that whatever. But it really, if you can get deep down in it, it's very hard to know sometimes. If you're operating from the thinking mind, are you making decisions based on fear, or based on yes, clarity, this, true?
Yeah, obviously a big important piece is starting to differentiate where that real impulse is arising from, which I agree with you, comes into the body picture, the embodiment piece. And as you were talking, it was making me think about all of the ways in which we're conditioned to break trust with ourselves, like to lose that thread of contact with our spontaneous nature. And I think maybe it could be useful to talk at that level for a minute so we can all kind of hold this same context together, because thinking about very simple things like growing up in my household, my parents were fairly controlling and regimented, and there'd be things like, let's say you feel hungry and they tell you shouldn't be hungry.
Mm-hmm. Simple things. Yeah.
Simple things. You're tired and like you shouldn't be tired, or you're not tired and you should be tired. There's moments when I was crying and I was told to stop crying, or they'd give me something to cry about, that kind of a line where my body had to just kind of like suck it up and come to fear its natural need, its natural impulse as bad or dangerous. We get conditioned in such a way that we come to not even trust this natural feeling that's coming through us. So like in psychology, we talked about emotions, for example, feelings and emotions. Feelings and emotions, they just arise within you. You don't plan on having a feeling. I don't say to myself, oh, Vanessa, they told you to stop crying, and now I think you should have an angry sensation over this. It's just anger arises, or grief arises, or fear arises. And in this way, Tantric Buddhists really think emotions are like gateways. They're alchemy. They are sacred because they are the most kind of natural self-arising phenomenon that we can connect with. So from this place, if we can start to understand that at this level, our feelings, our emotions, they arise spontaneously, then we can start to think about how natural that is to us. So in other words, anger, if it arises, it's just me. It's just a part of me. And grief is just a part of me. It's something that's moving through me, my nature. So when someone tells me a feeling is bad or a feeling is wrong, or I shouldn't have it, or I should suck it up, any of those things, then we start to get the sense like I am bad. I am wrong. There's a problem with me. I'm not doing things right. So before we even get to the level of conditioning, when we talk about preferences, like you should want money, or you should be a lawyer, or you should be, whatever, an actress, or whatever the case may be, if we just look at the fundamental way in which we're conditioned not to follow our instinctual flow and honor ourselves and make space for ourselves, that alone is a whole can of worms that I think later creates the problem where we don't even trust our feeling tone. We don't trust our intuition even.
Yeah. And then there's the whole belief that if we do, that we're going to do things that are selfish or lazy or aberrant, which I find dangerous, which I find really fascinating because we have definitely warped what truth or clarity actually means. Like we're so disconnected from it that we think to listen to it is dangerous because your truth will make you do something bad. The truth is, I want to eat a box of donuts, not really. Like, I don't really, or the truth is, I don't feel like going to work today. Maybe I never feel like going to work ever again. I'm not getting off this couch. I find that so fascinating because we've really gotten very far away from the truth if we think that's what our truth is going to tell us.
Right. Well, but that's the thing. We haven't gotten far away from it. We have been taught that our truth is a problem, that our truth will lead us astray, that if we were to exist in a world where we followed our impulses minus that super strong inner critic narrative, that we would be like lazy junkheads, like just
donuts on the couch, bitches,
treatsies all day. And when I work with clients, I can't tell you how many people don't want to let go of their inner critic because they think they're just going to fall apart if they, God forbid, followed their instincts, followed their self that exists that is not their inner critic, so to speak. The inner critic is just a learned ego response. So in other words, if I don't follow the rules and the thought processes that were handed to me by my culture and my family, if I don't follow those, the shit's going to hit the fan and everything is going to fall apart. So that is very fundamental. Like when we start to look at why is self-love in action hard and why is it so hard to kind of really hear what's genuine for us and then move from that place. Now it's making perfect sense to me as like why it's like, what did you say last time? Like, I don't know. It's like ninja stuff.
Yeah, it's the like, deep ninja warrior training of, yes, it is.
It does make sense because we're taught right away that if we were to actually listen to ourselves, we could have a major problem on our hands.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think an experience that I really do believe, and I might be wrong, because it's just an opinion, that a lot of people have had that points to a different kind of inner voice, truth voice, than the one that's going to make you never show up for work again and eat donuts on the couch, is what a lot of people call the still small voice. And so a lot of us have had contact with this at crisis moments in our life, where we really were needing to make some change. And some voice that's not us, some loving voice, comes in and says something like, sweetie, you're going to have to quit your job. Or sweetie, you have to end this relationship. Or my love, no more alcohol for you. This is never going to work. You have to get sober. There is this still small voice moment that I think a lot of us have a very small number of times in our life that it's like it pushes through. It pushes through the conditioning because it loves us that much. And it says, please see this, please see this thing that you're engaged in a different way and know that you can step away.
Your still that. Small voice is way more loving than mine. Mine doesn't say like sweetie or my love, but I do get that. And it's like come to me recently as I was talking to Kieran about something. It was like a very simple situation. There was maybe going to be a hurricane. My gut said, let's just get on a plane and go to New York. Mario's gut said, let's just stay. Mm-hmm. And at this moment when he shared what was true for him and it was different than what was true for me, it was like I went into complete confusion. Like I lost like a compass. And I was like, oh, now I can't seem to find what's true for me. Like, wow, isn't this interesting? Look at how my system wires so that I don't get conflict with people, right? It's like my inner defense mechanism against conflict. So as I was exploring that and I was chatting about it with Kieran, like how quickly my defense mechanism wiped out my options and everything, it became clear to me as we opened that whole dialogue that in every case in my life where something went wrong, someone was cheating on me, let's say, a job wasn't right for me, a friendship wasn't right for me. In every case, I knew it. In every case, I knew it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't the knowing that was the hard part for me. It was the trusting the knowing. Yes. It was the acting on the knowing and facing all that could arise if I was to take that step. So isn't that crazy? And I bet many of you would feel the same way. And please share with us if you do. When you look back on your life, do you recognize this still small voice that kind of knocks at you and it's like, hey ho, hey, maybe this, knock, knock.
And it's not always a voice. It's not always words. We're putting words to it because that's helpful, but it's often just a knowing.
Yeah.
Like you said, just like a,
Yeah. Oh, maybe no, maybe pass, Yeah. And like what you were saying, Brooke, like now I can go back and I can start to look at it. But we talked a little while ago about clench and unclench. Mm-hmm. And I think if you were to really to backtrack and examine some of those moments in your life, you can feel that before a knowing, before a voice, there was a clench or there was an unclench.
Right.
So let's say, for example, recently in my life, I've had a lot of people come up to me and say they wanted to collaborate with me on something or they want to work with me on a project. And I can immediately start to notice the difference if I track back and observe multiple moments. Some of them, like let's say when Brooke and I came up with the idea for Bliss and Grit, are like, hell yes, I'm on. There's no questions. There's no confusion. Mm-hmm. It's just excitement. But I can observe many moments where someone asked me and I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should probably do this. This seems like a really practical idea. Yeah. And I notice I start to make pro and con lists and you're observing it. It's gotten so clear to me because of my awareness now that I'm really crystallizing that if something is aligned for me, like Kieran's quote at the beginning of the statement, I want it. There are no questions.
Yeah, it's just a moving towards it. It's like falling in love. It's like, yes.
Yes, I want to go to there, period. And like, just like falling in love, you're like, I'll figure all the other shit out later.
Right.
Like it's almost that like idiotic freedom of like, it is a yes. Like mm-hmm. I'm going to do this no matter what anyone says. And then from that place of yes, you start to, put the foundation under the castle in the clouds, right? Mm-hmm. And you start to organize, okay, what will it look like? And what is the exact flavor that I need to create? And you kind of get in there and fine tune the details. So I don't know, I'd love to hear from all of you because maybe the voice of intuition is not that hard to find. Mm. Maybe that still small voice always existed within us, no matter how conditioned we were, no matter how controlled we were, no matter how beaten we were, or subject to cruelty or isolation, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the still small voice always exists. And the biggest impediment that we face is trusting it and then having the courage to actually execute it in our lives, especially when sometimes it does seem to bump up against some of these old patterns. Like, in other words, sometimes conflict does arise when we do what we want to do. People can have reactions.
For sure.
It's not just a magical universe where I choose. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what to do. Like, so you listen to your small, still voice. It says, here's what's true for you.
Mm-hmm.
You recognize what's true, and up pops a moment of fear.
Right.
As you're potentially about to like run into something that you would rather avoid. Then what do you do in your life?
It's dependent on the moments in my life. And what I notice is that, clarity, still small voice, whatever you want to call it, truth, it is always there. In meditation, sometimes it's what we talk about as the watcher. Like you get to the place where you can feel this, like what is the thing that's aware of me doing this right now? Like that kind of just watcher space. And so it doesn't go away if you ignore it. It's still there. And I've, made more than my fair share of choices in life where I ignored it for a long time. And it just gets to the point. I mean, a lot of people say at a certain point, it hurts enough. And we're talking about the big things, right? Like the big hurty, wrong choices, wrong moves, things that are not in your best interest of living a healthy, nourishing life. You get to the point where it just hurts too much to keep ignoring it. And so I think that what we're hoping to get to is that we don't have to get to that point where you're in so much pain. Your suffering is so acute and so intense that it's like the rock bottom thing, right? Like that's what clarity is in the terms of rock bottom. It's why I say I'm a big fan of rock bottom. I'm not a fan in the sense that I want myself or anyone else on planet Earth to ever have to experience it. But there's nowhere else except clarity. But wouldn't it be great if we could have clarity in a more moment to moment way where we don't have to get to the bottom to have something to push off of to get back up to the surface of the water, that we could navigate things in a more nuanced way, So I think of like yesterday, so let's take it out of the context of the big, awful calamities, which we've all experienced, and let's put it into the context of a normal day. So yesterday, I was celebrating my birthday with my boyfriend. We went into New York. Super excited. I've been so excited. I used to live in New York. I miss it. Whenever I go, I always have so much affection for that city. And we have plans where I'm going to go to the Whitney Art Museum. I miss the Whitney. I miss my art girl self. We're going to eat here. We're going to, blah, blah, blah. I have it all mapped out in my head. And then we're going to have dinner at Momofuku, my favorite place. And then we're going to go to this bookstore. I'm going to buy my favorite books. Like, me. Delight, delight, delight. I have so much delight planned.
Treat seas.
And like we go and we had a super lovely day. It was gorgeous weather. We get on the High Line. We go to the Whitney. And he and I are both sensies. Two sensies in love. And so at a certain point, around 4:00, we're just tired. Like I go to the Strand because I wanted to go book shopping because that was a part of my fantasy wish list. And I just noticed that we're both just tired. We're kind of checked out. We're not really connecting with each other anymore. We don't actually really care about what we're doing anymore. We're just kind of going through the motions because I had decided this is my birthday day where it's, he and I without our kids and hanging out. And so we go to I'm like, okay, we'll get some tea and we'll regroup. And, I could tell what was true for him was certainly, I'm tired. And what was true for me was certainly, I'm tired, but it's 4:00. So we need to hang in there for a couple more hours so I can go get my magical dinner that I've fantasized about. But what was great is that it was this moment of like, we're tired. Like it's totally fine to just get on the train and go home, which is what we chose to do. So I don't know how it would have gone if we had made the other choice, but I imagine we would have been tired, not connected to each other. We would have, robotically eaten a delicious dinner, but kind of like, we'd have gotten home late and been shredded and just not felt particularly yummily connected to each other, which was really my birthday wish, was to be able to enjoy things with my partner. And so instead, we were home by 7. We got Shake Shack takeout and ate it in the car and laughed and giggled. We watched some funny TV and we just had this like lovely, really delicious night together because we listened to our yes. So that's an example of like very normal, basic life. Nobody's dealing with like the terms of rock bottoms or horrible things, but it allowed this opportunity. There was this space there to be available to what was arising in the moment. Like that's
what. How did you even differentiate? So you're in this moment, you have this piece of you, this piece I know very well, both because I know you and I know me, that's overly enthusiastic, super maniacally attached to its expectation to go and continue and have more fun. And then you have this other piece of you that's true, and true is that I'm tired. So how did you shift gears or kind of navigate that moment where you notice these competing needs within yourself?
So none of this was planned out because I'm not a savant. But I'll describe how it actually happened because I think that these steps are actually applicable to all of these situations. So first, I stopped the forward momentum of I decided this is how it's going to go. In my fantasy narrative, this is how it's going to go. So that point happened when we're at the bookstore and I'm realizing I don't give a shit about book shopping right now. Usually book shopping is like one of my favoriteest, bestest activities in the whole world. But I'm like, I'm just tired. So the momentum stopped there because we could have spent 2 hours shopping for books when we were tired. But instead I was like, let's go across the street and get a cup of tea. So first, building in a pause and saying, this isn't feeling in this present moment the way that what I really wanted was the feeling of enjoying book shopping, not going through it because I said I would.
Right.
So if I'm not enjoying the feeling, let's pause. So then we paused. We drank tea. We didn't talk that much because we were tired, which was an opportunity to notice, oh, we're both tired, which I hadn't really articulated yet until that point. So then in the noticing, and we did the normal couple stuff where he went through like, oh man, like, I don't want to be the wet blanket on her birthday. I'm such a dick. Like, why can't I just rally? Like, why am I feeling tired? Maybe if I get this caffeine in me, and I can see him going through like, I don't want to be the one that wrecks her birthday. You know?
I have to sacrifice for
love. Exactly. And I'm sitting there doing all the normal stuff that anyone would do in the situation. I don't get into the city very often. We don't have days without the kids very often. I wanted to eat at Momofuku. I love Momofuku. I decided I'm going to eat gluten today. God damn it. I want what I want and I want it now. And telling myself those stories. And I was like, but again, the point is to enjoy, not to check off boxes on a list that I made in advance of what's actually happening. So I think building in the pause is critical, which is everything that we're doing with meditation, right? Like modern life requires that we make space for clarity. If we're just caught up in the momentum of what we've already decided is happening or that we want to happen, that becomes very difficult to hear what's true for us because we're just running down the path. That was something we decided in the past about the future. It doesn't have any present tense anywhere in it.
Yeah. So I like this example. Thank you for sharing. And I think it's important for us to look at the idea that true happens moment to moment, right? So oftentimes if we hear the vernacular, like live your truth and be authentic, people like us tend to think of like, what do I want to do for a living?
Yeah,
and
what
like,
city should I move to?
Yeah. As you said, like very big picture. And I'm sure most of you get what we're saying about that. And that's wonderful and that's beautiful because part of our truth is living our aptitudes and our gifts and our true potential. But how you get there is by moment to moment building this muscle of working with what's true and trusting that if we follow truth, it heals, that if we follow truth, there's some inherent goodness. And I think where it gets hard for us to do that is A, like we said before, we learn not to trust ourselves. B, we're afraid of the outcomes. So for example, when I knew somewhere deep inside that the man I was with was cheating on me years ago, like deep inside, it was like one of my first major boyfriends and I had been cheated on before and I just didn't want that to be true. So what my mind said was things like, oh, don't put your past on him. Don't be that girl that always decides that people are doing something wrong. Don't be afraid. I'm most prone to spiritual bypassing. So like my spiritual super ego is like, don't be that scared person that brings trauma forward. I mean, I had all sorts of things. And what's really happening? Well, in part, I just still didn't know how to listen to that voice and differentiate it by embodying and feeling. I was actually more dissociated than I am now. In part, I was scared to lose him. I had beliefs that, this is what love actually looked like, that men cheated. That was one of my beliefs. So I didn't know I could get different. So I didn't want to expose myself to the truth. I had fear that you only get one love in your life or something. P.S. I was 22 or 23 when this happened, but that you don't get love. It's not easy to find. I had fear about how much grief I would feel, if I had to be confronted with this. And so it was I didn't believe that I could handle the truth. I didn't want the truth. I didn't want to face that conflict. And, I'm sure you've experienced this, Brooke. There's a sense with truth that it's what's been seen can't be unseen. Mm-hmm. Once you acknowledge the truth, there is no backing up from it.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in a lot of moments in my life. And so I think many of us are afraid of the truth because we know that once I see it, I have this moment of choice where I have to either decide to leave someone that I love and all of those beliefs I just mentioned kick up and the fear and the grief, or I stay. But now that I know the truth, when I stay, there are other feelings that come up. How could I stay with someone like this? What's the matter with me? And all sorts of things that could arise for me. So it's almost like we believe it's easier not to feel the truth. Now, in the end, I still found out the truth. He was cheating on me. In the end, I still went through that whole process anyway, because I couldn't actually deceive myself. So there was a piece of me that knew that I didn't have my own back, that I didn't trust myself, that I didn't believe I had capacity, which led me to be even more afraid that I couldn't handle things. And what I realized in the aftermath of learning that he was cheating on me and breaking up with him and going through the heartbreak and everything was that the biggest betrayal was my betrayal to myself. That was the biggest pain. It wasn't the loss of a man. It wasn't, the fear around finding love again. That all kind of sorted itself out. It was this moment where I was I betrayed myself. I can't trust myself to take care of myself in these circumstances. And I see that, come up as you're talking to clients. It's first and foremost, always get your own back. Always follow what's true. Because when we believe that we don't have the courage or the wherewithal to take highest good care of ourselves by following what's true, we become afraid to engage in any circumstance. We become afraid to fall in love again or to choose a man, because how do I know I'll trust myself to choose a right man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we bump up against following the truth being hard. But Kieran said to Brooke and I this statement, #truth heals. It's a great statement. And I invite you all to ponder that, because that was actually hard for me to take in, truth heals, but people want white lies. And when should I tell the truth? And is the truth always useful? But you know what? Truth heals, because reflect on your life. Anytime you've denied your truth, how did that go? How did that feel for you? Anytime you haven't expressed an important truth, an eloquent truth to someone that you cared about, how did that go? And how did that feel? And did it feel right? So I guess on some level, we have to start to look at for ourselves, if we're talking about self-love in action, this process of trusting that the truth is welcome and good and essential.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought this all up. Most of my deepest griefs in my life are towards myself, about not listening to what I knew was true in a circumstance. And I can, it's a lot easier rear view mirror to look back and go, wow, I really let myself down there, because I knew what was true and I was acting from a different place anyway. And like you said, then we lose our internal compass. We lose faith in ourselves, which is so interesting, because actually what we're learning is that truth is always there. It's always available. We can always move towards it versus moving towards fear or moving towards whatever story we're telling ourselves. So in some ways, these moments where we let ourselves down should bolster our faith in our internal compass because it was there the whole time. We didn't choose it until a certain point at which we could no longer not choose it. We could no longer act from a place that wasn't true, but it was always there. It is always there. So in a certain sense, there's this basic ground of trustworthiness in all of us and in the world that we can always just become more available to. And what we really have to be distrustful of is all of this conditioning that tells us that the truth isn't trustworthy, which is crazy, but that's exactly what we have. That the truth can't be trusted because it'll lead you astray. We lead ourselves astray when we don't listen to what's true. And I've been thinking about this a lot and I haven't come to any kind of conclusion on it. But I'm curious if in my life, every action I've ever taken, whether great or small, has been based on one of two things. And I'm laughing at myself because it's like, yay, black and white thinking. But one of two things, every action or choice has come from either clarity, i.e. truth, or fear. That you can, with any movement away from truth or clarity, there was an underlying fear. And this comes from Kieran too. So gratitude to Kieran, because this is my work with her, is uncovering like any movement away from what's true for me is fear. You know, so let's go back to, again, this super banal example of a birthday celebration, right? Because it's not the big, super sticky stuff. And if I had chosen to stay in the city and have the birthday celebration I had decided in advance I was going to have, it would have been fear of not enough time together without the kids, fear of when is the next time I'm going to get back and be able to eat my yummy B-Day dish, fear of, being seen as sleepy and lame to him or to myself, or, all of those things, they're all just a grab bag of fear stories.
Sure. I mean, if you look at the example I just gave, which was a bigger, example in terms of, someone cheating on me and the kind of emotional torment we could face, it was fear that I wasn't good enough for something different, fear that I would never find a better love and I'd be doomed to be alone, fear of loss, fear of the pain I'd feel, at the separation, at the grief. And so I think it's a fair way to look at it. It's at the very least, I think we should say it's a useful way to look at it, because as all of you are beginning to let this percolate in your own lives, I'm sure everyone's going to be thinking like, but, easy for you to say, but, and like truth heals except for, because we're all going to come up against this energy of fear. And part of self-love is to just have compassion for that. Like we said in the beginning, just to hold it like a parent should just hold a child. You don't need to lecture yourself. Just make some space. That we've been through so much in this lifetime, if not, who knows, lifetimes before, that have taught us to move away from following clarity and to live under lack, scarcity, fear, practicality, that it is a very new movement. And Brooke and I have said it, I think, in other episodes. It's so subtle that we don't even realize. I had a client the other day and she knows what she wants to do for her career and she's starting a business and she's an energy worker. And then all of a sudden she came into the session and she's like, should I do X, Y, and Z because it's more practical? And like I have people coming to me and I'm like, no, you know what you want. That's the voice of practicality. And it's crushing in from your culture as well as from inside, that it should be like X, Y, or Z. So please, as you all begin, have a lot of kindness and softness and compassion. And maybe just, if you can maybe hear it in our voices, which is like curiosity, like, oh my God, that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Mario had a different need than me. And my truth like wiped out of my brain for a second. I like dissociated. So I avoid conflict. That's just fucking interesting. It's not a problem.
Right. Exactly.
It's just interesting. And start small. Like, am I tired? Do I want this? Does this feel like an unclench? Do I want to eat this? Start very small.
Seriously, food is a great way. Yeah. Simple, basic decisions of what do you move towards for lunch? What's a genuine tuna salad versus kale chips or whatever? Like, what's your genuine?
Cold?
Yeah.
Where's your
It's a very helpful way to start playing with that. And, one other thing I just want to say, because fear is a great shapeshifter. It will disguise itself as truth and clarity so many times. So what I want to say is just like a basic guideline is that clarity or truth is always feels spacious. Like we're saying unclench, which by the way comes from Martha Beck, clench, unclench. It always feels spacious and it always feels kind. So the voice that says, you stupid bitch, you should have quit your job years ago. Not truth.
No, not.
Why do you always destroy every relationship that comes your way? Not truth. So it always feels like a exhale. It always feels kind and it always feels spacious.
And yummy.
And yummy. Yummy.
So chew on that.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. You can also come play with us on the social media channel of your choosing. That's hard to say. We're most often at Instagram and Facebook, and we are Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you want to support the show, you can write us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. It helps to let us know how we're doing. It helps other people to find the show. And if technology is not your thing, but you really are enjoying the show, well, then we would love it if you just told your friends who you think might resonate with what we're talking about. Huge gratitude to all of those who have written reviews already. We are so excited and really honored to see the reviews coming in. And so far, we've gotten them from Arlene Lives Instagram, Fellow Truth Seeker, Kirsten03, CPD 2016, Z House, Jeremy from Legato Bodywork, Becca DiLiberto, Sports Dude, and Sarah Belziles. So thank you so much, all of you. It means a lot to know that there are real people out there that we're connecting with and to actually hear what's going on for you with listening. So here's the review from Jeremy. I'm going to read this one. Listening to these two women discuss issues of pain and suffering in the context of spiritual practice and finding meaning is extremely refreshing to me. It is an age of spiritual bypassing, and nothing irks me more than well-meaning truth seekers talk about the bliss without talking about the shit. And the shit, or the grit, if you will, is where the good stuff is, and these women know it. As a fellow body worker, I absolutely love and appreciate the somatic-oriented practice you are advocating. This is a great listen for anyone going through hard times or just going through life with an open perspective without putting the blinders on to shield you from the pain. You'll gain a lot by listening, and you'll feel like you have a couple of wise friends with you in your living room. Thank you so much to Jeremy. Thank you so much to all of you. It means so much to us, and we will be back next week.